Hello everyone, welcome to my channel SW Metro official channel.
The finality was not a dramatic explosion but a slow, agonizing bleed out of hope, culminating in the sterile, unforgiving glare of a notice taped to the front door, a notice that was not a warning but an epitaph. Finally, the bank authorities, those faceless arbiters of a contract signed in a time of boundless optimism, had confiscated Kody's house for non-payment of the loan. They were bankrupted. The phrase itself, bankrupted, is a brutal, clinical term, a financial declaration that nonetheless feels like a medical pronouncement of a terminal condition, stripping away not just assets but identity, stability, and the very notion of a future. For Kody and his family, this was not a single event but the last, crushing scene in a long-running tragedy of mounting dread, a cascade of missed payments, frantic calculations on the backs of envelopes, ignored phone calls from unknown numbers, and the constant, gnawing anxiety that had become the soundtrack to their lives, a low hum of despair beneath the surface of everyday routines. The journey to this moment was a masterclass in the slow erosion of the American dream. The loan itself, once a golden ticket, a key presented with a smile and a handshake in a brightly lit office, had transformed into a monstrous, insatiable entity. It began with a single missed payment, a temporary setback blamed on an unexpected car repair or a dip in freelance work, a small crack in the foundation that was hastily patched with promises of next month. But next month brought its own challenges, and the crack widened, becoming a fissure that threatened to swallow everything. The letters from the bank evolved in tone, from polite reminders to stern warnings, their language growing colder, more impersonal, more legalistic. The phone calls, once manageable conversations with a customer service representative, became relentless, automated, and then were handed over to the clipped, impatient voices of a third-party collections agency, for whom Kody was not a person but a delinquent account number, a problem to be solved. Every ring of the phone, every walk to the mailbox, became an exercise in stomach-clenching terror, a Pavlovian response to impending doom. The family budget, once a spreadsheet of aspirations, vacation funds, college savings, home improvement projects, was whittled down to a stark ledger of survival, a desperate triage of which essential could be sacrificed to feed the hungry maw of the mortgage. They cut the cable, then the streaming services, then switched to the cheapest grocery store brands, the quality of their food declining in inverse proportion to their rising debt. The house itself, their sanctuary, began to feel like a gilded cage, its walls seeming to shrink and press in on them, each creak of the floorboard a reminder of the immense weight of the financial obligation hanging over their heads. The actual confiscation was a bureaucratic autopsy performed on a still-warm body. It was not a dramatic, sheriff-led eviction with belongings tossed on the lawn for the neighbors to see, though that cinematic horror often played in Kody's mind. Instead, it was a process of suffocating legality. The formal notice of default. The acceleration clause invoked, demanding the full, impossible balance. The court summons that arrived like a death warrant. The foreclosure auction, a surreal and distant event where their home, the place of their children's first steps, their Christmas mornings, their whispered dreams in the dark, was sold to the highest bidder in a matter of minutes, becoming a mere line item on a docket. The final notice to vacate was the period at the end of a very long, run-on sentence of failure. The day they moved out was a funeral. The echoes in the empty rooms were deafening, each hollow footstep a mournful drumbeat. The ghostly outlines on the walls where pictures once hung were like scars. Standing in the doorway of their child's empty bedroom, looking at the faint marks where glow-in-the-dark stars had been stuck to the ceiling, Kody was not just losing a structure, he was losing a repository of memory, a map of their shared history, the physical manifestation of their collective soul. The act of handing over the keys, or more likely, leaving them on the counter for a bank representative to collect, was the ultimate surrender, an admission that the contract had won and the dream had lost. The aftermath of this financial and emotional annihilation is a vast, desolate landscape of after. Bankruptcy is not a clean slate, it is a brand, a scarlet letter that follows them into the rental market, where applications are now scrutinized and rejected with cold efficiency. It is the shame that colors every interaction with family and friends, the unspoken pity in their eyes, the well-meaning but hollow platitudes that feel like salt in a wound. It is the dismantling of a future they had taken for granted. College funds are now a cruel joke, retirement a fantasy, the concept of ever owning again a laughable impossibility. The psychological toll is perhaps the most profound and lasting confiscation of all. The bank took the house, but the process bankrupted their sense of security, their trust in institutions, their belief in a predictable and orderly world. It breeds a generational fear, a deep-seated anxiety about debt and stability that will be passed down, a toxic inheritance. For Kody, the man who signed the papers, the weight of perceived failure is a constant companion, a corrosive force that questions his role as a provider, a protector, a competent adult. The family unit, strained to its breaking point under the constant pressure, must now navigate a new reality defined by loss and the humbling process of starting over from a place of profound deficit, their notion of home forever fractured, forever conditional, forever haunted by the memory of the one that was, finally, confiscated. Kody and his family, the eviction was not merely a change of address, it was the violent unmaking of their world, a public declaration of failure etched onto a sheriff's notice tacked to their front door, the final, humiliating period at the end of the sentence of their financial life. The bank authorities, impersonal and inexorable as a force of nature, did not confiscate a home, they repossessed an asset, a parcel of bricks, mortar, and delinquent debt, but in doing so, they confiscated the very stage upon which a family's life had been performed, leaving them bankrupt not just in their accounts, but in their spirit, their security, and their sense of place in the world. The path to this precipice was rarely a single misstep but a treacherous slope of compounding misfortunes, a medical emergency that devoured savings with voracious appetite, a sudden layoff that severed the primary artery of income, a small business strangled by a faltering economy, or simply the insidious creep of inflation outpacing stagnant wages, where the math, once manageable, slowly became a terrifying equation with no positive solution. Each month, the specter of the mortgage payment grew larger, its demand more shrill, while the means to satisfy it dwindled, forcing impossible choices between keeping the roof overhead and filling it with food, heat, or medicine. The letters from the bank, once polite reminders, evolved into stern warnings, then pre-foreclosure notices, each envelope a fresh wave of anxiety, ignored for a day on the kitchen counter as if its contents might mutate if left unread. The phone would ring with unfamiliar area codes, and a cold dread would settle in the pit of the stomach, the relentless, automated hum of the collections department, a modern-day sword of Damocles dangling by a frayed thread of forbearance agreements and desperate promises to catch up. Kody, like so many in his position, likely navigated a gauntlet of hope and despair, clinging to the belief that a turnaround was just around the corner, that the next job interview would be the one, that the side hustle would finally take off, that a family loan might bridge the chasm. He might have spent hours on hold with loan servicers, pleading for understanding, for a modification, for any shred of mercy, only to be met with the implacable logic of algorithms and corporate policy, where a human story is reduced to a credit score and a debt-to-income ratio. The shame is a corrosive companion in this journey, a self-imposed isolation that silences pleas for help from friends and family, fueled by the toxic American dogma that financial failure is a moral failing, a personal weakness rather than a systemic inevitability or a twist of cruel fate. The house itself, once a sanctuary, becomes a prison of anxiety, its walls seeming to shrink with each passing day, every creak of the floorboard a reminder of its impermanence, every happy memory now tinged with the bitter ache of impending loss. Then comes the auction, a grotesque public spectacle where the most intimate space of a family's life is sold to the highest bidder in a sterile courthouse room or on a digital platform, the gavels fall echoing with the finality of a tombstone sealing shut. The eviction, when enforced by the sheriff, is a ritual of profound powerlessness. Strangers in uniforms, polite but firm, oversee the removal of a life's accumulation, the mismatched furniture, the children's artwork on the fridge, the photo albums, the worn sofa where dreams were whispered, all hauled into a storage pod or scattered, the material evidence of a family's history rendered transient and homeless. To stand on the sidewalk and watch the bank's representative change the locks is to experience a unique form of destitution, a visceral severing from the physical manifestation of the American dream, now reverted to simply brick and wood, no longer theirs. The bankruptcy filing that follows is often a technical afterthought, a legal admission of defeat that discharges the unpayable debt but does nothing to discharge the emotional and psychological toll, the shattered credit a lasting scar on their financial identity for years to come. The aftermath is a landscape of profound dislocation and trauma. For the children, it can mean changing schools, severing friendships, and trying to process a deep, inarticulable sense of insecurity, the foundation of their world having proven to be terrifyingly unstable. For the adults, the psychological impact is seismic, a compound fracture of the soul that breeds depression, anxiety, and a corrosive sense of grief for a future that has been irrevocably stolen. The search for new housing becomes a new circle of hell, with applications scrutinizing the very foreclosure and bankruptcy that made them necessary, pushing families into precarious living situations, overcrowded apartments, or the mercy of relatives, their autonomy shattered along with their credit. The societal ripple effects are equally devastating. Neighborhoods pockmarked with empty, bank-owned properties see property values decline and community cohesion fray, as houses cease to be homes and become instead vacant, silent monuments to economic fragility. Yet, within this narrative of absolute loss, there often exists a stubborn, resilient core, the human capacity to endure and, eventually, to rebuild. The confiscation of the house, while a cataclysm, is also, paradoxically, a release from the crushing, unsustainable weight of the debt that caused it. The bankruptcy, for all its stigma, offers a grim slate, a chance to start the agonizingly slow process of financial recovery without the specter of that particular millstone around their necks. The love that made a house a home does not reside in its drywall or its deed, it resides in the people, and that, while shaken, is not so easily repossessed. Kody's story, then, is not one of a singular failure but a stark chapter in a much larger, ongoing national story about the precariousness of the middle class, the brutal efficiency of financial institutions, and the often overlooked human cost of economic policies and market corrections. It is a cautionary tale, yes, but it is also a demand for empathy, a reminder that behind every foreclosure statistic is a family living through their own private apocalypse, standing on a sidewalk surrounded by their belongings, watching as the bank authorities confiscate not just a house, but a lifetime of effort, and the immutable truth that security is, for too many, a fragile and fleeting illusion.